Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today, I want to talk about an article I came across on mybroadband.co.za about cybersecurity becoming a business continuity problem. And I thought, who better to talk about that than Daniela Parker? Daniela, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Alex.
So let me ask you some of the things that this article talks about. But first, why are organizations still treating cyber as a separate entity, all on its own?
I think that can probably be said about the technology side as a whole, right? Not just cybersecurity, but IT in general. But in particular, cyber, I think that people are so intimidated sometimes by the language, by the threats, not understanding, and then maybe worried about looking incompetent when they're asking questions or speaking up. And I'm thinking that people also don't know how to connect the dots in an organization. Again, for me, everything is always connected. And so connecting the dots between what happens on the cyber side and the rest of the business is just not very common. But I think mainly it's really because people are intimidated by the skills that cybersecurity professionals have, by the language they speak, by the environment they operate in, right? That hacker kind of picture that people have. And so I think that's probably a big driver on that side.
I think there might also be some of that us and them, because
Yes.
before we started recording, you mentioned something about IT people and cyber people sometimes not speaking the language of business, and
Yes,
then that
for
creates the
sure.
divide, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, when they come to the table and they present a problem and you only understand about 20% of what they're saying, it's really hard to then say, sure, here's your budget money, or yes, we're going to support that. So that definitely goes both ways.
Yes, who's never had a conversation with IT people where half of it is nothing but an acronym,
Yes, 100%.
which can have multiple meanings, and then you're really messed up.
Yeah. Can't Google fast enough what it means, right?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
who should cyber reach out to, or alternatively, business continuity? How should they approach talking to each other?
Well, so for me, having worked in the risk management area of an organization for so long, that was always a natural fit in my opinion, because cybersecurity professionals, they're risk managers. I mean, everyone's a risk manager, but they're really very focused on the risks to the organization in the cyber area. And so a natural fit for me is the risk management space. I actually, when I was a chief risk officer, I had information security as part of the risk team. They were not in IT, they were outside of IT. The bank regulators in the US actually recommend that they are independent from the operational part of IT. And so the risk folks are really a natural fit. And then vice versa, some ways to get involved is really through tabletops. That's one of my favorite things to do is when you do a tabletop on a cyber incident, how can you not involve the rest of the organization?
Well, how do you get business continuity to address cyber incidents? Because part of this article, what they were talking about is cyber is an entity unto its own and does its own thing, but then business
Hmm.
continuity has its roles and responsibilities and activities that it takes care of, including being involved with incident management. But cyber is
Yes.
doing that too. So how should those two really touch base?
So if I think through the incident itself, the cyber team is very much focused on responding to the actual cyber threat, right? And then what happens in the rest of the organization is someone has to communicate to the organization, to external stakeholders, possibly regulators. Someone has to figure out, if you have to take the organization down or if the incident brought the organization down, what happens on the operational side? Who is monitoring, what processes are working? Who's calling the insurance company? Who is doing everything that has nothing to do with the response to the actual cyber incident? And for me, the business continuity area is really that bridge between the incident response on the cyber side and then the organizational response that has nothing to do with, the forensic work or figuring out what's going on with the data. Those pieces stay within the cyber realm, and then everything else, though, someone has to handle it. And for me, that's business continuity.
Is that part of the problem? Like each side is trying to think the other one is ta trying to take over?
Part of the problem is a lack of role clarity in a lot of these situations. And to be honest, I don't believe anybody who's dealing with a cyber incident is super interested in having to communicate with the executive team, the regulators. They just want to focus on the work, right? But a lot of times, if you don't have role clarity, if you don't know who is on for what, then in an actual incident, A, we're not thinking all that clearly. And then B, that's where you cross paths and that's where you duplicate, or even worse, things fall through the cracks and they don't get done because you didn't take the time to figure that out ahead. And I mean, we know that, right? From the business continuity perspective, we want to figure things out before something happens. But I think that's then if there's no role clarity and if it hasn't been practiced, if they haven't gone through exercises where people truly understand how it works, then you run into problems.
Yeah, I agree. I worked for a client, did some work for them about 2 years ago, and they had a cyber team and they put on a cyber response plan. And the executive went through a tabletop and made all these assumptions about business continuity, disaster recovery, activation of continuity plans, and all these other different pieces. And I went, well, your cyber, and they were calling what they did a great success. And they said, actually, it sounds like it sucked. I said, because you didn't include all these other teams. It's all based on assumptions. Well, I
Yes.
could base anything on assumption, and make it look fantastic. So,
Yeah,
your point, it really needs to work together.
it absolutely does. And I will tell you, it starts with a common language, right? How many times have you heard someone refer to DR as the all-encompassing business continuity piece? And then people get, if you don't have a common language to start with as an organization, where if someone says disaster recovery and it can mean five different things in the organization, that's problem number one, because you'll never get role clarity if you don't have a common language that it's based on. And I mean, there's frameworks out there, but outside of us in the space, who really takes the time and reads, the glossary and understanding the terminology? But then that's on us as the professionals to say, or the practitioners to say, we start with a common language. Here's what each term means. And now whose role is what? And then we move through that process.
But I go off topic just a little bit here.
Yeah.
I worked for another company doing some business continuity stuff, and they had a cyber team, etc. What they did is they just had cyber as an extension of their existing IT disaster recovery incident. I forgot that they had an interesting name for their team, but their whole technology component, cyber was just another piece, and they followed all the same incident management pieces because then they weren't doing what you had already said. They had role clarity and they weren't
Mhm.
duplicating effort.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, if it works for the organization, right? Because that can also be different as far as how big the organization is. In some organizations, information security is kind of like other duties as assigned for someone in IT because they're just not big enough. They don't have a big enough team. Maybe they can't outsource it. So it does depend on how your organization is built, whether or not you're in a regulated environment where some of these things are looked at from an examiner's perspective. But at the end of the day, if you set the foundation, you agree on your common language, understand who does what, and then you practice it, you're much more set up for success.
How do you go about that, knowing that sometimes it's very difficult to knock on the door for IT teams or business doesn't want to, talk about anything related? I know some of the activities you identified here could help build that bridge, but how do you take that first step when right off the bat I don't understand, that's your area.
So I had the opposite experience where having a risk program under me, the IT side of the house said that they referred to me as internal affairs and my entire team. And the director on the IT side would tell his folks not to talk to me because I was internal affairs, whatever that meant, right? So it got to the point where I finally just marched into his office and said, I need to talk to you. Like, you really need to understand that I am your way to budget money because I will help you translate what your challenges are into impact likelihood and then figure out what the mitigations are that you need and put some dollars and cents to it. I will get you budget money. When you come to the table and you just scream, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and back to the language, right? Nobody really knows what X, Y, and Z just meant. That is where I try to build those relationships and say, I don't think you understand what I do in the risk management space. And that same can, if you look at business continuity, maybe they don't understand what exactly you're doing. Maybe they don't understand that you are the one that keeps all the calls from hitting the help desk in an incident, right? Because we all know how that goes. Something happens, everybody picks up the phone, calls the help desk. They're wanting to fix something, but they can't because they're busy answering phones. As a business continuity coordinator, that's where I then step in and say, nobody gets to call IT. If you have a question, you can call me, and I am that bridge. So the technology side or the cyber side of the house, just really saying, can we talk? I don't think you understand what my role really is, what I do, how that supports your goals. That is, I mean, it's selling. You have to sell the benefits of what you're doing to that group. So that's, for me, that's always been one way to really be successful in that space, to just say, I need to talk to you about what I do and how I help you. Not how you help me, but how I help you, right? And that goes a long way.
So sometimes I'm thinking the title of the article, "Cybersecurity is a business continuity problem." It's not. Cybersecurity is really an opportunity to increase your network, relationships, and help others, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's what again, it is a sales process, right? When you work in sales, that is how you sell. You sell based on the benefit, not the feature. When we in a risk profession struggle with support or buy-in or people to understand what we're doing in the organization, ultimately we can use that same approach. I need you to understand what the benefit is, right? I need you to understand that there's a difference between what I do and what maybe the internal audit side of the house does. And on the business continuity side, because in a lot of organizations that is still owned by IT, for some reason, really talking through, who handles this and who does that? Is that really IT? And again, most of the IT folks will tell you, I don't want to do that in an incident. I don't want to have to call, the executives. I don't want to deal with the front line or the operational folks. I don't know anything about that. So they need to understand exactly why it's in their best interest to work with you, what they get out of it. It's always been my favorite approach is just selling. We just have to sell what we do.
Yeah, it really comes down to those role clarifications. Like you just went
Hmm.
through some bits there, because I know people who would never want to talk to executives under the best of times, let alone during
Yes.
the worst.
Right. I mean, and again, right, that your team, your cyber team needs to be focused on that event. They cannot they cannot manage the rest of that whole process that needs to be managed. That is their sole focus should be on the incident and not having to worry about what's going on the other side of the house. I mean, again, they'll get updates and they'll be back and forth, but ultimately you're kind of clearing the path for them to really focus on what they need to focus on.
Yeah, it's like probably not the best analogy, but firefighters. You're working with firefighters to make sure everyone's safe, but you're focusing on getting your people out of the building and evacuating while the firefighters then can go where they need to go, help those that need the help right off the bat. So you
Yeah.
are working together, not trying to tell the other one what to do and get in each other's way.
Yeah, you're kind of like dispatch, right? If you want to stick with the firefighting analogy, where you call the people that need to be called and you tell the people that need to know and clear traffic, right? That's exactly how it's supposed to be. But many people don't really know. They're like, yeah, you do that business continuity thing. Doesn't mean much to me because, maybe I think I should own it to begin with, or, I don't want to have anything to do with it because I have a pile of problems I'm trying to solve on the technology side. So yeah, but doing that ahead of time, right? That's the other big piece to that is you cannot have these conversations after something happens in the middle of going through the incident.
Mhm. Well, we've come to the end of the episode. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share on this article where cybersecurity is a business continuity problem?
Really, just, I share it with you. I just came back from a cybersecurity conference. I don't have a cyber background, but I love these conferences because they open up the door for some communication. They help with those conversations to understand what people do. It also makes it a lot less intimidating for me because I learn. Just go and knock on someone's door and ask, like, can we talk about what you do versus what I do, how I fit in your picture? Communication, just start with that. And because it is a business continuity problem, right? A cyber incident will disrupt the continuity of your business.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. On that note, we've come to the end of the show. Daniela, thank you so much again for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex.